Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Open Minds on Air, the official podcast of the Open Minds Foundation. I am your co-host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find more about this podcast and the Open Minds Foundation by going to openmindsfoundation.org, where you can find lots of articles. You can find all of the previous episodes as well, so please do go and check out the website, and of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And I am joined once again by my good friend and fellow co-host, John Atack, and a very special guest. We are joined once again by our friend Christian Szurko, who is a review board member here at the Open Minds Foundation, and is also the founder of the Dialog Centre, and you can find out more about the Dialog Centre by going to dialogcentre.org.uk, and we will, of course, link up to that in the show notes. But John and Christian, how are you guys? It's been a little while since we've all talked together on a call, but I'm very excited about today's episode.
There was a deathly silence while John and Christian
I was
decided.
waiting if you guys want to add anything to that, or...
I was enraptured by your communication.
Yeah, it's just your way of doing it. What can we say, Pierce? I've actually got a little bit of a cold, but I'm soldiering on. And so, if I collapse into a fit of coughing, then just turn the recorded sound down and ignore me.
Yeah, we'll just drop you off the call. Well, no, you sound okay, John.
Yeah, so far. But it may give you guys a chance to talk if I've got a sore enough.
Right. Well, yeah. Rest your voice,
last
John.
time. Yes.
We weren't going to say anything, were we, Pierce?
No. Yeah. I'll keep quiet.
It's the safe thing to do. Yes. And how are you, Christian? Moving on swiftly.
I scarcely know. It's been a kind of a busy day today. Found myself stuck in traffic, wondering if I was going to get back to the office on time, but here I am.
Good. Did you get something to eat in the end?
I did, yes. I had a very nice salad, apart from the dressing. But never mind.
Good. Apart from the dressing, yeah.
Good. Excellent. I still have not had lunch yet, so hopefully I'll be able to make it through today's episode, and we're going to be talking about. I guess it's sort of perhaps a bit of a continuation of some of the stuff that we covered the last time you were on the show, Christian. But you'd emailed me earlier today, and you wanted to talk about the use of communication as a means of control in recruitment and indoctrination, into authoritarian groups or relationships. And I guess, Christian, kind of, why don't you lay out for the listeners, what it is about communication that you want to kind of explore on today's episode?
Well, let's see. First thing I want to say is that all the things that we're talking about are things that happen in normal relationships all the time. The problem isn't with the functions themselves. The problems come about when those functions are misused in a way that is manipulative and destructive. So whether we're talking about verbal communication or nonverbal communication, whether we're talking about jargon and specialized language or peculiar affectations of speech or whatever we're talking about, these are things that are normal and, for all intents and purposes, universal to the human species. So we're not talking about some kind of bizarre esoteric magic that's being woven on people. We're simply talking about how normal things can be perverted for abnormal and destructive ends. So that's the first thing I need to say.
Can I jump all over you immediately? Just to say that I think that's very, very important, that there is this notion that what we're talking about is some kind of enchantment, or brainwashing, these wonderful terms that are used by people who are not involved in this field for the most part. And it isn't. It is, as with undue influence, that's just an amplification of influence. It's too much influence. You can have just enough influence. And the same with communication, that the language is the same, the approach is the same. We're human, and it just is subtly played with.
Yes, and that's the point really that I want to start from. Once we're talking about that, then I'm hoping that we'll have the time in this hour or so that we have to talk about the different ways that can be used, the some of the different kinds of things that are manipulated, whether we're talking about damaging and fracturing language and syntax in its structures, or whether we're talking about redefining words, or even when if we get to talking about nonverbal communications. These are all normal things that we can quite easily talk about in the context of normal, safe, everyday communication. It's simply that they have been corrupted, which is why overall, really what I'm talking about is communication corruption. Mm-hmm. So that's where I wanted to start from.
And there's a base which is healthy communication. It astounds me that our schools don't teach kids, how to communicate, how to be courteous, and how to not put the other person on the defensive, and how to listen actively to what somebody says, and not just say whatever.
Yes.
Or to just simply agree with whatever the authoritarian figure in school is telling you. That's
exactly.
That's certainly prevalent, and that's something we've talked about that before. I mean, the sort of obedience in school, and I would say they don't really teach any kind of like communication skills, and that's something that I've noticed is the older I get, and you start really developing relationships with people, be it a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever. And I think that's a big problem just in everyday life, that we don't know how to really communicate to people, or certainly we don't even know how to necessarily listen. That's like another thing. There's always we're like a society where it's constantly about let me solve your problem for you, not really actually let me listen to what you're saying, and maybe I don't have anything really to say to it, but you just want me to hear this. You want to be able to communicate something to me, and that's something that that's like the basis for most like couples therapy is that there really is no there isn't a flow of communication back and forth. It's one person that's expressing themselves and another person that's not really actually listening, but just trying to kind of introduce, well, this is what you should do. And if you do this, then that will be the end of your problem. So, that's something I think that's endemic all over the place.
It's a good point. What the purpose of communication is, and to I think to a large extent, it's to comfort ourselves. It's to get feedback. It's to be part of the community, and people then become obsessed with the content of the communication. Having to conform to certain standards or means of expression, or that it must be a kind of evidence-based. I had a conversation with somebody a year or so back who explained to me that conversation is actually combat. Somebody wins and somebody loses. And, I hadn't realised that. I thought we were sharing. I thought it was, but there you go. That could just be me, of course. Maybe I've got it wrong again. Well, sorry, Christian, you wanted to say, Go ahead, Piers.
No. You jump in, Christian.
I was just going to say, this is one of the things that I've found over the years is that a really important starting point for working with families, with an emerging member or an ex-member, and just in general with people, is to give them exercises to experience listening.
The conch.
Yes, I mean,
among eventually, once they
we'll get to that.
Of what
we might get to that. We might get to that, but
the conch may remain a mystery from here on out.
It might also do that. Yes, it might remain an in-joke that only 2/3 of us really understand, or maybe only 1/3, or maybe none.
Well, let's get a mathematical survey and work it out.
Well, we could just use a random number generator.
Please write in and say if you know what the conch means in the context of whoever's holding it gets to talk. Basically, that's.
John, you went and gave it away.
Spoiled it. We were going to keep people listening till the end, and now they're just going to go. That's all it was about, then.
And they'll turn off. Yes. Yeah. What is the point of having a listener contest? I mean, we must be the first blog of our kind that's doing listener contests. Surely.
Here you go
and spoil it.
Maybe we'll send them a signed conch. All three of us will sign a conch.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yes. This gets weird by the minute, doesn't it? No, what I think I was trying to say, I'm trying to remember now, but what I think I was trying to say was that I found that encouraging people to practice listening to each other as an active part of a conversation, the assumption being that I need to hear more than I need to speak at first, and encouraging people to practice that and use it constructively. It's been very helpful. It's been very restorative to broken relationships, and I think it is one of the things that we fail to teach, because now everyone just talks over one another. They shout at each other. They type in capitals on whatever social media. But, the point is, and then if they don't like what you're saying back to them, they just block you or unlike you or whatever it is you do on these things.
Defriend you.
Defriend. Yes. Okay. It's that sense that I have an opinion and you must hear my opinion. And if you have anything to say about my opinion I don't like, then I invalidate you as a human being.
Yeah, how dare you?
That undermines the very essence of any kind of communication. So
it leads to upset people, whichever way you look at it. It's not a way to a happy life, really.
Yes. Whereas if you start with a kind of agreement, or call it a covenant, or whatever you want, an agreement, I will listen to you. You will listen to me. We will listen until we understand each other, and then we'll decide what to do about our differences of opinion.
Yeah.
Then you get something constructive happening between those people. And so,
or you can just start the conversation by going, "You're a Nazi."
Well, yes,
and see where that leads.
Yes, yeah. or whatever. Yes, but in our schools, this idea of listening isn't taught. I have this feeling that if you don't respect the pupils enough to listen to them when they need you to hear them, it's one of the things that contributes to them growing up to be people who don't listen to anyone else because they haven't had that. And likewise, in the home, how many parents would rather have their phones glued to their ears or surgically inserted into their skulls or whatever, rather than stop to the exclusion of all other input and simply have a face-to-face conversation with their 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child. Heck, let's start at 3 months old when the child is just learning. Let's start at 3 days old. Let's start at 3 hours or 3 minutes old. Give the child FaceTime.
How many parents are going to give equal time to their kids to talk?
Well, yeah.
I was very lucky, some would say not, because my mother was an absolute chatterbox. She just talked. She just kept talking. And I just found that really interesting. There are other people who found it a little bit frustrating because she'd tell the same stories over again. Have you? But I just thought she was quite fascinating. There was just something about her to me, that the way she told stories and what have you. Well, you knew her, Christian. She was splendid.
I enjoyed sitting listening to her.
Yeah, exactly. But so I'm the same, and certainly one of my brothers, and I'm not naming any names here, is we will talk and talk and talk, as you've both noticed by now. But that's why I'm probably a communicator. That's why I've spent my life communicating things, writing things, talking, counselling, some people would call it, but talking with people and doing things, because for me, I love to talk. I love to listen. And if I want to come away from a conversation not having won an argument, because that would make me feel bad. I don't like it when other people are upset. I'm just soft that way. What can I say? Or a discussion where we've both provided our information, and we've both come away knowing more than we knew at the beginning of the conversation. And, when I talk with my friends, when I talk with Christian, who I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing for 30 years, that's how we talk. We've never shouted at each other or called each other names or any of that, even though we've known each other for that long. Because it's an attitude of mind. What is the communication for? Is it to break the other person down, to defeat them, to overwhelm and overcome them? And there's a problem in the schools that's often the case, because the classes are too big or whatever the reason is. Sure. But teachers find themselves reduced to being autocrats, authoritarians who are saying, no, you shut up and listen to me. And that's not really what education is. Education is where you learn stuff, and you learn stuff because you feel comfortable, not because you feel stressed out of your brain, but because you feel comfortable and because you're, interested. You're interested. And you look at environment, well, the communication in school all comes from the history of school. The Prussians introduced universal schooling because Napoleon had beaten them and they wanted good soldiers. It took about 50, 60 years before the British followed suit because they wanted women to be able to work in the factories all day. So the kids had to be out of the way till they were old enough to work, which, by the way, was about the age of 8. Get them down there in the pits. I mean, there still were chimney sweeps in that society, 4 years old, but we won't get into that. In the States, it was to homogenize the population. You look at all of these reasons for having an education system, you go, well, what about helping people to live together better?
Yeah.
What about helping people to have more fulfilling lives? What about, some these, and many teachers try to bring that to the table, try to do that. But the system, the straitjacket of the standards movement, everything done by SATs and exams, it's just a machine. It's with no humanity left.
Well, the idea is to have a measurable statistic for everything. This is pure management culture.
And so the politicians can say we're now 0.01% more literate than we were under the other government.
Yes.
Sure. Well, this is the management in the worst sense of the word. Management as an end rather than as a means to an end. Yep. You have to have a statistic. If you can't measure it and put it up on a graph at the end of the year, or put it in in Excel spreadsheet or something, other spreadsheets are available. You haven't done anything. You haven't accomplished anything.
Is it Nepal that one of the Himalayan countries actually measures gross national happiness instead of gross national product?
Yes.
And that they banned
Bhutan.
Coca-Cola. It's Bhutan.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yes, Bhutan.
And they've banned Coca-Cola.
Good for them.
And those two things are not altogether unrelated.
Well, I heard the minister talking about why he banned Coca-Cola. They banned all of the caffeinated drinks. He said, well, what's the good thing in it? It's the water. We've already got that, thank you.
It's funny you were mentioning almost like this compulsion to spout out statistics and to be able to shrink everything down to a number. Well, we're 50% lower unemployment than the previous administration, and that does seem to be this.
I got one this.
Say again, John?
One that was reported recently here a month ago, it was reported that one of our charities had done a survey of, I think, 11,000 children aged 14. And they determined that 22% of girls aged 14 in Britain have self-harmed, and that 9% of boys have self-harmed. Yeah. Now, that really alarmed me. It was a horrible thing. And then in New Scientist, there was a piece saying, yes, the question they were asked is, have you deliberately hurt yourself in the last year? And that had become self-harming. Yeah, I smacked the wall because I was angry.
Right.
Yeah, I,
kicked the door in because I, got into a fight with my parents.
I stalked my ex-girlfriend on Facebook, to torture myself. But that becomes self-harm. And probably, I don't know if other people like me, when self-harm is used as a phrase, I think of cutting.
Yes.
So 22% of 14-year-olds have, and I kind of go, come on, let's be honest, 100% 14-year-olds have done something that harmed them in the last year, Well, they're not teenagers, but it's all a matter of how it's perceived. Well, and that's the statistic, lies, damned lies, and statistics, as a famous man once famously said.
Well, that's sort of what I was going to allude to there, is that we almost like from this age when we're in school, where we're listening to a teacher, as you were saying before, John, almost like shouting at the students, because they're overcrowded, they have limited amount of time. It's not really about actually having a conversation. It's just sort of about feeding them information that they can then use on a standardized test so that their school will, be in that percentile that gets the extra funding every year. And, I feel like that almost is sort of, it engenders this sort of this sense of, that these numbers don't even really mean anything, that what these people in authority are saying are meaningless. And I'll hear this all the time from politicians, unlike my opponent, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And under my administration, we've seen, growth through this and that. And then, the other guy will say the polar opposite. And I find many times it's just this is all meaningless, and I my eyes sort of glaze over. But that seems very much like a symptom of all of this, that we're told this endless stream of nonsense when we're kids in school. And then we hear other authority figures like politicians and whatnot spewing out numbers back and forth, and it means nothing. And again, they're not actually communicating anything. We're not really listening to what they're saying.
No, and that it's set in a kind of, tomorrow is a brighter day. I'm the person for the job. You're fantastic. I love you all. We're going to be fantastic together. Everybody's going to be really happy. It's just set in trite nonsense with, when we went through Brexit, some of the numbers that were being thrown around. On one side, we had Boris Johnson and Michael Gove on one side, and they're telling us that we're going to save, what was it, Christian,
350 million pounds a week.
Yeah. If we leave the EU. And it's sort of, you go to, well, where did this number come from? And the reality is, well, we made it up.
That's like all of the statistics that the federal government here spews out about, historic black unemployment, all these things, and where everyone's making more money. My favorite is always the stock market is doing great. I mean, how do you even measure that metric? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, yeah, I guess so. If you're a billionaire hedge fund,
you've got something that has no increase in value whatsoever. That's increasing or decreasing in value based upon how people feel and think. It fascinates me that if you look to the market, that when it gets really bullish and when the prices are really flying, you're headed for a fall.
Exactly.
It's the biggest, before the Lehman Brothers and what have you. Yep, that's what will go on. The market will pump and it'll bubble. Bang, gone.
Yeah. Right, and then it recorrects itself by basically making everyone, poor and these things, like you say, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, these companies become meaningless overnight. Well,
which were worth billions the day before. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, I think that is related to what we're talking about. Again, with the way that these things are being communicated to us. We're being told everything is great. We're given this mindset when we're kids to listen to the teacher, the authoritarian figure, or our parents, and then when we grow up and we become older, politicians are sort of the ultimate parents, and you can, the whole idea, the nanny state, which is a term I kind of can't stand anymore, but I think it applies, it works. I mean, there is a reason that it kind of clicks for a lot of people. And I guess my question for you, Christian, is how is the kind of the current state of our sort of poor communication skills, how is that being used against us? You said earlier at the start of the podcast the sort of corruption of communication. So why don't we lay out some of the kind of the main ones?
Let's talk about corruption.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes. How is this happening to us? What's being used again? Because in and of itself, I mean, communication is it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just sort of a fact of life. But how can it be used against us?
It depends which end of the stick you're holding, actually, whether it's a good or a bad thing.
Yes, if you're on the seesaw and the big extra heavy kid on the other end suddenly gets off when you're in midair.
Right.
It's not as much fun as it's not as much fun as if you're the kid on the end who gets off suddenly and walks away.
It is the corruption of the seesaw, not the seesaw itself.
Exactly. Okay, let me just kind of put this into a couple of bits here.
What an eloquent word that is, bits.
Bits, yes, that's a technical term there. Bits.
Not bites or nibbles as we used to have back in the old days.
Oh well, no, I don't have.
Probably nobody listening to this that knows what a nibble is. So we've got another conch. Just write in how many people know what a nibble is.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, okay. What I'm getting at here is that a skillful manipulator can disrupt all the normal processes, and those disruptions throw us off guard mentally, and that gives a skillful manipulator space in our thinking process, if you like. It causes our thinking process to suspend long enough that he or she can redefine words, undermine ideas, replace them with new ones, change our inner associations with all kinds of language and ideas, and by verbal means, create a new inner landscape in our reality.
A new description of reality, a new map by which we read the signs of the stars and the heavens and what's happening in the world.
Yes,
and it's an astonishing thing when having been through it myself, and I suppose you did as quite a small boy, really, Christian,
yes.
To have the world, to understand to what extent our perception and understanding of the world comes from the language we use.
Yes.
That we do have, purr words and snarl words. Appeasement is a snarl word. Democracy is a purr word. We've none of us really much idea what they mean necessarily. Appeasement means to negotiate with somebody and arrive at a compromise rather than having a war.
Yes, but now compromise is a dirty word too. You don't compromise unless you have no principles or standards. If you have no principles or standards, you compromise. You're a compromiser. Or in British terminology, you might even be you might even be fraterning, mightn't you? As opposed to the lady who was not fraterning. Or in American terminology, you might be a flip-flopper. We just have all these ways of saying it. We have all these ways of saying it, but the point is made.
Donald, if you're an American,
Sorry?
Turncoat, somebody who's changed their mind completely. American expression, I believe. Benedict Arnold was on our side.
That's right. And he turned his coat.
What a good man he was.
All depends on how you look at it.
Exactly.
I'm afraid he hasn't hung around long enough to express his own opinion.
Well, I don't know.
Pierce knows what I'm talking about.
Probably decided he couldn't be a traitor to the crown any longer.
Oh, well.
We're not going to broadcast to any American audiences, are we?
No. Strictly.
No, the internet is... Yeah. There's a wall around America now, and it keeps the internet out of America.
Yeah.
Okay, let me come back to answering your actual question there. Because you did ask me a question. So what I'm talking about are things like altering or reshaping the way we construct sentences grammatically. Now that can be by using some kind of an idiosyncratic thing.
Can you give us an example of that, possibly?
Yes, I could, but I would have to talk about Donald Trump.
No, we're not doing that.
Right. Okay. So you see, I can't really do that. That's the one that's fresh in my mind. If
we have tax exempt status, mate, and we want to keep.
Right. So I'm not talking about that. I haven't even mentioned his name. Other presidents are available. But, another example that I can think of is Guru Maharaj Ji of the Divine Light Mission, which later became Elan Vital, and so on and so on. Guru Maharaj Ji...
With watchers.
Sorry?
Sorry, nothing.
Guru Maharaj Ji had his own particular combination of his Indian syntax in English, plus kind of hippie West Coast, almost valley person kind of English that he stuck it together with. And I noticed in a number of the long-term members that I counseled when they left, that for a time, they spoke with this same kind of English, which wasn't native to them. I've had people from the Highlands of Scotland whose language had changed, and it made them part of the group. We'll talk more about that when we get into it. But there are that kind of thing. You're
telling me that suddenly people would be talking with a Scottish accent?
No, I'm saying that Scottish people suddenly started sounding like American, what we would call the Valley accent, from Los Angeles, but with a slight Indian kind of inflection and a way of constructing certain things.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced it many times. That people who take a very long course listening to tens, in fact hundreds of tape recordings of the leader will start to sound like the leader.
Exactly.
And the same is true of handwriting. I've seen people who started cloning the leader's handwriting, which is a bit worrying. Yes. Yeah, their individuality becomes merged with the divine being of the leader.
Yes. So this is one aspect of what I'm talking about. This idea that grammar is slightly broken, syntax is slightly broken in order to make that distinction between the in-group and the out-group. I've heard people likewise who used to speak with a proper British English accent, who suddenly, on moving to Texas and joining a particular sect down there, suddenly started speaking like they'd been born and raised on a horse in Texas somewhere. That's part of what I mean. I also mean the redefinition of particular words, and Scientology has got to be the master of this. With its own dictionaries, 2 of them.
500 pages each.
500 pages each. There's no question there.
All neologisms, yeah.
Yes, there's no question there. Well, neologisms, but also taking perfectly normal words.
Well, they become neologisms because they no longer mean anything like their original meaning.
Yes, okay.
Like reasonable, for example, which is a cuss word in Scientology.
Yes. So you have this,
They don't like open-minded either, but we won't say anything about that. Oh, too late.
So you have this redefinition of the actual words which are carrying meaning, so that the words...
Hubbard wrote a piece, as you know, Christian, called Propaganda by Redefinition of Words.
Yes.
So he was very hip to how you could do this. And you're going, why are you telling us about this while you're doing it to us?
Absolutely.
And in the end, I think that's true with many of the gurus, that they confess to you all the time. And when you look back over you realize that certain jokes they made, they weren't joking.
Sure.
They really did mean those horrible things they said.
Yes. Everywhere you look throughout the New Age movement, you'll hear words that have a long established meaning within their own traditions, words and names for that matter, which suddenly have been redefined so that Jesus is on the planet Venus, or the Buddha's living on some other planet, or
Venus is on the planet Jesus.
and they're using the same words. They're using familiar words that people think they know. The trouble is that if you try to talk to someone who has redefined this much of the language, you're talking past each other, and it becomes almost an invisible process of talking past each other.
Symbols that are being offered as language have different meanings to the parties in the conversation. Therefore, there's no way to understand what's being said anymore. And the person has become sealed off from the world. In Scientology, I was very aware of this because I was never on the staff. I was never a living member. And I probably shouldn't say it publicly, but, I wasn't traumatized, abused, or humiliated. And I think that makes me unique in my experience.
Well, that's why they came after you left, John.
And they
realized you escaped without the abuse and humiliation, and they had to make up for it.
Yeah, but that even so, I was aware that there was a language spoken within the group, and it never changed the way that I spoke to people in the broader society. I didn't adopt the terms to then. Because one of the things Hubbard said was that if people had misunderstood words, if they didn't understand them, it would force them to commit, to transgress, to do nasty things, commit overts, as they say. And so, yes, on the one hand, you're saying, look, this makes people attack you. And on the other hand, you're giving them all these new words that they, the first drill I did in Scientology, having paid £5 for my first course, was called Operating Theta Training Routine 0. And you're going, so if the misunderstood word is going to harm me, why am I being told this operating thetan or thetan bit? Why is that up front? And the same is true with the whole of it, that listening to ex-members talking in interviews, and it may be years after they've left, they'll suddenly say, but I have no blame, shame or regret.
Yes.
Now, those happen to be 3 levels in Hubbard's, get this, below death emotional scale. And most people, this is for the general information, according to Hubbard, anybody outside of Scientology is in fact dead in the head. That's the expression he uses, because you're below death. And blame, shame, regret, they're the 3 of them that are paired together, put together. And it's a general way of exclusion. All cliques, all claques, all groups of people will develop a language. Yes. People who share a technical expertise will need words to describe, the bits of the body they're going to poke about, or the aspects of an engine that they're going to construct. So a language will come into being, but it can then become so rarefied that leaders will actually change the meanings of words as they go along. So, again, in Scientology, my constant reference point, I'm afraid, because it's so useful in describing these things, you'll find that there might be 4 different definitions which are conflicting, because they've been taken from different times. When Hubbard went, well, question and answer, when we say Q&A, it means this. Now, it basically means to hesitate in Scientology, a question and answer. And you're going, oh, so you just do what you're told. That way, no hesitation. We don't want that. But there are 4 definitions, I think, or several definitions in the technical dictionary, which have conflicts between them. And that makes it, you're trapped in the language. You can't get out of the thing. You can't make sense of the subject. And you can't make sense of it because, unlike physics or chemistry or biology, which have the language is there to help you understand. Here, the language is here to trap you.
Didn't Hubbard even allude to that in, I want to say it was like in one of his diaries or something, when he was obsessed with the whole...
But you haven't read his diaries, have you?
No, but when he was obsessed with the whole like general semantics, and didn't he kind of laid out that if you can make people... if you can redefine what words and phrases mean to people, that's when you have like ultimate control over them. When you can convince them.
His propaganda. That's his propaganda through redefinition of words that you're talking about, isn't it?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, right. Okay.
That certainly fits the bill.
And that is like the ultimate kind of. I mean, that almost reminds me of the sort of like 1984. Of course I'm forgetting it now, but the math problem that he's told it's actually
how many
different...
fingers am I holding up?
Yes, exactly that. Right, that whole thing. I mean, that is like the ultimate kind of form of control. In a way, when you can, especially when you're talking about like words and phrases that are ubiquitous within our society. you used before, John, the example of, reasonable, that actually being reasonable is sort of like a 4-letter word in Scientology. When you can convince people of something like that, you really...
It means finding excuses in Scientology, finding reasons. Hubbard said you must never be open-minded about Scientology, which is why I loved it when somebody suggested we call ourselves the Open Minds Foundation. I can't remember. It was probably you, Christian. You were in the room. I wasn't. So I'm going to blame you.
Okay, blame me. Actually, Pierce, in mentioning 1984, it's one of the reasons why I encourage ex-members to read that book at some point, because it gives them a suitably safe way of looking at the subject of how language works. You skip straight to the
appendix.
To the appendix, exactly. But
and then the appendix, it's the worst of his books. It really is. It's so badly written compared to his other novels. He was dying.
I have found so many Jehovah's Witnesses who have enjoyed reading it because it gave them a context for describing what they felt like in the group, in having this redefinition of their whole lives take place through the language. But even in the appendix, where he's talking about doublespeak and the importance of creating a new form of English, which eventually should make it impossible to think a wrong thought.
Yeah.
So you can't commit a crime.
So you can't commit thought crime because you'd no longer have the words to contain that thought crime. And that whole thing, the reason for reading that in the book is that it's interesting where the man working on the dictionary is describing how their task is not to add words, but actually to eliminate words.
Right.
Yeah, drop things down the memory hole.
Yes. And by eliminating words, you are eliminating more and more possibilities of ambiguity and of thought crime. And that's why that's important there. But even just reading the appendix, you get a very strong sense of how the redefinition of words, even without grammatical reconstruction, is a very powerful tool for controlling what a person is thinking about. Where I've seen it, for example, as well. We've talked about, if you like, the low-hanging fruit of Scientology, but even in a lot of the Christian sects, I've spoken in the last couple of years to a whole group of people who came out of one particular sect, where we got talking about something, and it came up suddenly that the word grace in their sect meant the approval that you earned from the leader by doing what you were told. And that's grace.
Yeah, and you'd experience grace. And for those who are not religious, grace is the transcendent state of feeling at harmony, at peace with the world. And it is given by God, according to, the Christian perspective, or I think generally theists would believe that, but it's a good feeling.
And in particular within Christian teaching, grace is a free and unmerited gift.
Yes.
It is, the word charis means gift, and whoever heard of earning, I got a birthday gift because I earned it. No, that's sorry, that's not what we're talking about.
You didn't earn it. No, you're absolutely right. It's why the comedy show was called Will and Grace, because one of the writers had been in a Catholic seminary, and the two principals were Will and Grace.
Yes. And
look, I found this thing. I found it. It's right. Can I just interject these words of wisdom from the founder of Scientology? It's on Caroline Leckerman's wonderful website. And shout out to Caroline and to Jerry Armstrong. They've both done astonishing work. They really have, making available this material. This is from Propaganda by Definition of Words, published, I think, first in... hasn't got a date on it. I think it's somewhere around about 74. 71. There is a date on it. The trick is, this is Ron Hubbard, founder of a religion, speaking. People say I'm ironic at times. The trick is words are redefined to mean something else to the advantage of the propagandist. From words to the end of the sentence in capital letters. Words are redefined to mean something else to the advantage of the propagandist. The redefinition of words is done by associating different emotions and symbols with the word than were intended. The way to redefine a word is to get the new definition repeated as often as possible. Thus, it is necessary to redefine medicine, psychiatry, and psychology downward, and define Dianetics and Scientology upwards. This, so far as words are concerned, is the public opinion battle for belief in your italicized definitions, and not those of the opposition. A consistent, repeated effort is the key to any success with this technique of propaganda. One must know how to do it. If there's any doubt about whether we should be doing it or not, we are doing it. And I wrote about this years and years and years ago because it just, after leaving, all of this material that I'd never seen before, stuff like this. And there it all is, only given to the people that need to do it. The public relations or harassment sections or whatever.
Yes.
Redefined to mean something else to the advantage of the propagandist.
Exactly. Well, there's no point in doing it any other way, is there?
No, it wouldn't be propaganda.
Why would you do it randomly?
Yeah.
And unless you're truly suffering a mental illness, in which case you've got your own inner logic.
And in Hubbard's case, I think Yuval Laor is probably right that Hubbard was a temporal lobe epileptic.
Yes, which is not a mental illness as such in the normal way we use that phrase. But
it creates a set of behaviours which cannot be. There's nothing. We don't know what to do about it. Don't believe there's any real treatment for TLE because it doesn't manifest as rolling about on the floor, with a grand mal fit. Because you often don't even notice it because only the eyes will do anything. But the Bear-Fedio traits show, this guy, he has all 18 of those traits. I've been through them painstakingly. And so you've got this funny idea that this man whose mental processing is severely afflicted. So, for example, hypergraphia, the need to keep writing all the time. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific writer of all time. Did he have hypergraphia? Well, he wrote more than anybody else ever did. So possibly he did. The narcissism, the paranoia, that I interviewed so many people who'd say collapse into himself if he wasn't adulated. You'd find him crying in the corner of the room. Just one person after another that I interviewed over the years, they'd seen this. But this guy built a deliberate system, and there you have it. We can influence people by reaching through to the emotion that's under words and tinkering with it. Which, if I was with Orwell, what I'm sorry, I find 1984, it's a beautiful set of ideas, but I love Orwell's writing. He was a phenomenal writer. So I would say read the appendix and then read Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Of course they are.
2 legs fat, 4 legs good. But he, as a fairy tale, I think that it works because it's beautiful. It's an astonishing story, and particularly if you get the was it Searle or Scarf who did an illustrated version of it. Fantastic. I'd get their work confused. Which one of them did Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing?
That's we should make that another listener quiz.
Yeah.
Ralph Steadman?
I'm all for listening.
Stedman.
So Ralph Steadman.
2 other, yeah, absolutely. Stedman did a version of Animal Farm, which is gorgeous. And there you have the simple principles that are used. The language is changed, and you can use wonderful abstractions like freedom. I mean, could you define freedom for me? Could anybody define what this is? Well, we mean freedom from slavery. We mean freedom from oppression. We need freedom from want. we mean freedom from war. But we could also mean freedom from peace. We could also mean, freedom from food. That this word is an emotional load which has nothing behind it, which of course is true of all abstract words, and why Korzybski, with his, the word is not the thing itself, the map is not the territory. These, the two little distilled piece of wisdom from the hundreds of pages of incomprehensible material, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
What was he talking about? Ahmed had the same problem. He actually, his second wife and the science fiction writer A. Van Vogt explained to him what Korzybski meant. But that powerful understanding that you can use words that, inspire people, and, words that deflate people, words that disgust people, that we don't even like to think how easy it is for somebody else to move our emotions around simply by using words that trigger responses in us. And I'm not going to use any of those words, but the reality is that any negative word you want about any human condition will quite likely trigger an emotional response. Somebody who's had a bad experience with pork rinds, for example, you talk to them about pork rinds, they're not going to like that. But when you get into the big emotions, the jealousy, the envy, the subtleties of our emotion, I think, there's an ancient sociological theory that says that our emotions are constructed from the outside, that they're at the interface with the world. We're not born with them. And then, from the other side, you've got, I think we do have certain basic responses that we are born with, which then become more and more subtle because of the use of language, because of, what's polite and what's not polite. Showing the soles of your feet in Thailand, is it? Whoa, that will get you in trouble. Hold your shoe up in any of the Arab countries, and, unless you're waving it at an overthrown dictator. Yeah, that is permitted, I think. It certainly was. But there are things that we do that, Aaron Beck talked about mind reading and the ability, the expectation that other people, particularly one's spouse, will know what you want because it's obvious what you want. But the truth is that mind reading is, and again, in teaching kids about communication, mind reading actually is something that's just in books. Except when it's cold readers, except when it's people are trained in how to, work out what you're saying, all of this neurolinguistic programming stuff where they're watching your sub-vocalization. So if they say, what's the name of your dog? And you don't say anything, they can tell you it's Fido because they're watching the muscles underneath your mouth. Oh, yes. You can, and Christian, you were telling me about the guy who could find your eyes blind spots the other week.
Yes.
But you can, develop very special skills that get past people's perception. And language is, how do you get a group of people to become a mob? You harangue them. You shout at them. You say, we are the greatest people who have ever been. And those people over there are being horrible to us. Let's go and hit them. Yeah. But usually in slightly more subtle language. I actually got Dr. Frank Luntz out here, but I think I'd probably better return us to Christian and our topic du jour, which I have doubtless strayed from. Back to you, Christian.
Just a tad. Well, I'm not even sure what I'm talking about anymore, John.
Good. I think that's amazing. You bring that confusion through the use of language.
Exactly.
That is the unfreezing, and during the unfreezing, you change.
I was going to talk about that too, but I think I'll just leave it go. What I was doing originally was just listing some of the kind of highlights of the way language can be used against us. And it's interesting that you mentioned purr words and snarl words, because there are different ways of charging language so that they have more impact than their meaning, whether you mean their standard dictionary meaning or their specialized meaning within the group. You can add to the impact that they have on their hearers. So, for example, there is the emotional charging, which John referred to before, the purr words and snarl words, which have emotional content and association. But then there's also volitional charging. And that grows out of emotional charging. I've noticed it to be something slightly different, because there are some emotional words you can use, and their end point is that you feel the emotion that they're intended to make you feel, and then you await further response. But some of them contain, as it were, within their own compliance to the group's virtuous or required behavior. So you can have, you could have, for example, a word like stolen valor. Now, in the American context, stolen valor has come to have snarl response.
Wearing medals you don't deserve, for
wearing
example.
Medals you don't deserve.
Like a certain group of people who will not be mentioned here.
Claiming a military record you don't have even is sufficient. Wearing the uniform with or without the medals, or any of that kind of thing. The fellow who thought he would get away with claiming that he was one of the first responders at 9/11. People have been verbally and sometimes physically confronted in airports because they were wearing a certain Army patch or Marine patch, and somebody who was really from that part of the armed forces knew fine well this person didn't belong and confronted him about it. And the next thing you know, bang. But it's actually, it's as I understand, it's ensconced in American law that stolen valor is actually an offense now.
Yes, it is. I checked it a few years ago because members of that group's Scientology C organization, so-called SEA, as in body of water, would wear campaign ribbons on their left breast, on their uniforms, and they're all meaning, I took this course in, standing on one leg, or none of them, I went to the toilet and managed to clean myself up afterwards, or whatever the little course was. They don't actually do that. I don't think they. But that, to me, it's exactly that. And I'm not militaristic. I'm generally pacifistic, but believe in the right to self-defense. Let's put it that way. But to me, my father served throughout World War II. He saw Dunkirk. He was at Normandy, and he was at the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. And he was a peaceful man, but he served as a on the front line as a mechanic for sergeant major of the battalion that serviced tanks, and so it feels personal. He didn't have much in the way of medals, but he deserved them, and guys that have been shot, been injured, that and been given in the US a Purple Heart. It's offensive that a certain individual, who has already been named several times, should have claimed to have had 2 Purple Hearts. It is stolen valor. Sorry, stolen valor. Well, it annoys me. Sorry.
Well, yes. Where I was going with that. The idea behind a thing like stolen valor, if you are in the military, it is deeply offensive on the emotional level. It also tends to provoke a response. You don't walk past a person like that. Once you've identified him, you don't walk past him. You do confront, if only to get him to take the stupid badges off, or to or the patch or whatever it is. It contains the seeds of its own response of action. That is the required behavior. And I'm using that example in particular because I think most people would agree, as we have just done here, that stolen valor is a wrong thing. It isn't just that it's part of some weird cultic behavior or something to oppose stolen value. This is something which is an offense to our decency.
Yeah, it's a proper behavior. It's a proper description and a proper behavior to respond to.
Just as if you saw a genuine sex offender trying to kidnap a child off a swing, as soon as the word sex offender pops in your mind, yes, there is the emotional snarl reaction. But there is also, within that identification, the realization, I must do something now. And that's normal. Where it becomes the abnormal thing is where you have certain groups of probably well-meaning but almost certainly misguided people who don't know the difference between pedophile and pediatrician, and therefore think it's think it's okay to attack the pediatrician.
Yes.
And that unfortunately has happened as well. So what I'm saying here is that it is possible to create a conditioned response, let's call it.
A knee-jerk reaction.
A knee-jerk reaction, if you want. A conditioned response where you not only feel something, but you must act.
Yeah.
And from there, I would go on to something else called an esoteric charging. And I know this is something people don't talk about, but
this is a bit esoteric.
This is esoteric. Yes, it is. It's to do with the division between the in-group and the out-group. It's that sense that you have, if you're in the in-group, I know what these words really mean. I belong, you don't. I am part of something bigger and more important than you can possibly imagine unless you join us.
The electoi.
Sorry?
The electoi.
Yes, the electoi. And that means that because I know what the words truly mean, I'm on an inside track, probably even on an inside track with the master, and that makes me special.
Yeah, elevated.
So that kind of, all right, let's call it elevation charging if you prefer, but that kind of esoteric charging.
Well, it's esoteric because it's a sense that you share in a secret, something.
Yes.
The hidden knowledge. You understand what the master is truly saying, and the exoteric are just, totally naive and walking around blindly. And, that's very much, we were talking about that.
The ignorant systemites, it says in the past, doesn't it? Ignorant systemites. That's what the rest of the world.
We were talking about that with Yuval on the last episode with, within the conspiracy culture, the secret knowledge of understanding the true reason that, the Illuminati let go of, are spraying chemtrails everywhere. That elevates you. You now are, you're part of the in-group. But no, continue, Christian.
And of course, we even have people claiming that they are woke.
Yeah,
as opposed to those.
That is my biggest pet peeve in the entire world is the use of that phrase, that word.
Fractured syntax, word redefinition, and esotericism, all compressed into that simple 4 letters, woke.
Yeah. And it's used by people who truly are not actually, quote, woke.
Well, I don't know. It sounds as if they may be to me.
No, yeah, but that's a great example right there. And again, too, it is it's almost like become. It is like a new word, It is. It's a completely redefined, and it also has. I think it woke as a word is so useful for, say, control or something, because it can mean so much to so many different people. For a lot of people, it's you want to be considered woke. That's a good thing. Whereas for me, I hate anyone that says that. I know that I don't like them, and I don't want to be around them. I don't want to have whatever asinine conversation about how they're so woke about something. And it really kind of gets me angry. So it is one of these words where the meaning of it means so much to so many different people. But continue.
I'll bet you didn't like to do the Macarena either when it was a fad.
No, probably no. I didn't.
Anyway, so that also is part of it. But I also wanted to mention the idiosyncratic use of nonverbal communication, because again, nonverbal communication is practically universal. I mean, there may be people. Obviously, I've noticed amongst people with visual handicaps, for example, that their body language is markedly different from the people around them simply because they don't have the visual feedback that tells them exactly where their body is in space and how they're using it. But apart from that, and apart from natural individuality, if you study groups long enough and see enough of the membership for long enough, you begin to realize that each group has its own idiosyncrasy of how to communicate non-verbally. And by doing that, they're able to hide meanings from outsiders so that only the insiders know what this or that means. And they're also able to cut across the words that are being said. I'm thinking of gang members now. You know, you can get a gang member who is saying what he needs to say in order to deal with whatever legal consequence he's facing. And at the same time, he can indicate by certain gestures, I'm just feeding them a load of baloney to get out of here. It's okay. I'm still one of us. And in other groups, you'll see the same kind of thing. You'll see that the verbal communication is only part of what's going on, and the body is also saying things, but through posture, through gestures, even through the way clothes are worn, and through other behaviors. And this is normal. This is absolutely normal. I used to have a very good friend. He's long dead now, but he was a judge, and for a long time. And one of the things that I noticed was that even when he wasn't in his robes, he had a particular way of walking, which he had learned because that's how you swing your legs in order to keep the heavy robes from tripping you up. So you're not just moving your leg forward to take a step, you're also pushing the robe out of your way. Mm-hmm. And when I mentioned this to him, he got up from his chair, walked across the room, and he said, "You know, you're right." He said, I wear robes for so much of my day now, and if I don't push them out of the way, I'm not comfortable with the way I walk because I end up tripping over them and getting tangled up in them. But it's just a normal thing we do. It doesn't matter if we're doctors or judges or thugs or clergy or athletes or frat boys or whatever we are. We have certain ways that we behave, which are part of the identity that we've chosen for ourselves, but also they're part of the way we say, I'm one of you guys, and I'm not one of those guys. You know, you watch an athlete, a long-term high school or college athlete walking along. There's a particular way they flare their knees slightly as they walk. And more often than not, they have that kind of ever so slightly bow-legged walk.
And when Brad Pitt does it is it War Machine about Afghanistan? Is that the movie?
I didn't see it.
Brilliant. I don't see it. He walks with a lovely kind of chimpanzee stance throughout it. It is a great film. It's funny. Oh, okay. And it's historically scary because it's like the Rolling Stone. Is it McChrystal?
Yes, it's the Runaway General by Michael Hastings, the late Michael Hastings.
The late Michael Hastings, yeah, who came to a bad end, unfortunately. Yeah. Which has provoked a certain amount of conspiracy theory, given what he did. You know?
Yeah. And given who commented on after his death. The Runaway General is interesting, too, because there is, very similar to this, Michael Hastings reported that there were these guys that McChrystal hired to when senators and Congress people would come to Afghanistan, you know, on these fact-finding missions, McChrystal employed these guys that Hastings alluded to maybe that they were CIA psychologists, but they used all of this sort of strange verbal language in order to convince senators and Congress people that even though they could see with their own eyes that Afghanistan was failing, but they would, during these tours, they would be talking in such a way as to convince them that everything was good and that they just needed more money. And as long as they gave them more money and a bigger budget, everything would be better. And that's very much what we're talking about with the
statistical management.
Yeah, and kind of the corruption or the weaponization of communication in order to get people to give you a particular response or money or what have you. And that was something that McChrystal apparently used all the time. It's not just cults or gangs or stuff like that. It's also our generals as well.
Yeah, and all of the euphemisms around the damage caused by war. All of the wonderful list of expressions like
collateral damage. Yes, of course. Enemy combatant. These right. They truly, especially the enemy combatant can basically mean any
5-year-old child.
Yeah, exactly. Who's near enough to a terrorist, then they're an enemy combatant, even if they're a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, standing within 500 meters of a terrorist being a significant offense.
Yeah, and anyone within the potential bomb crater, in other words.
I warned you that I'd got Frank Luntz here.
Oh dear.
But John Kerry, right? Said Frank Luntz understands the power of words to move public opinion and communicate big ideas. Any Democrat who writes off his analysis and decades of experience just because he works for the other side, snarl word, is making a big mistake. His lessons don't have a party label. The only question is, where's our Frank Luntz? And I think those are words that Hillary Clinton, who I am allowed to mention, might be ruining to this day. If she'd read this book, she'd probably be president. He gives a list where he says it's called Keeping Up with Language. Language changes. So he has used car, pre-owned vehicle, secretary, administrative assistant, housewife, stay-at-home mum, stewardess, flight attendant, waiter or waitress, server, caretaker, estate manager, garbage removal, sanitation services, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, impotence, erectile dysfunction.
Well, he's also the death tax instead of estate tax, and climate change instead of global warming.
Yeah, exactly. A really significant figure in the history of politics. The stuff that he wrote for people. No longer in favour, I don't think, but it's probably earned enough, so he's okay. But I must have. It's a book called Words That Work. It's not what you say; it's what people hear, and it's got one of my favourite things in it, which is Warren Beatty, the great actor and brother of what's her name, the Shirley MacLaine. That's our trivia. I could have people write in for that, couldn't I? Oh, there's no index. Oh, yeah, there is an index. Warren Beatty, and I'm going to see if I can find this. So everybody sit there quietly and twiddle your fingers while I'm doing this. And we'll find, there he is, page 18 and page 82. I thought, and it's worth waiting for, I promise.
Okay, we believe you.
Keep talking, John.
Well, yeah, this is what people on the podcast want to hear. John ruffling through pages,
ruffling, and wittering at the same time, free of charge. As Warren Beatty, perhaps the best student of the human condition in Hollywood, once told me, and this is Frank Luntz speaking, not me, people will forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that's a fundamental experience of language, that if we are in a heightened state, very anxious, angry, we don't take in all the information, and we will remember events with the cast of the mood in which we experience them. If you add to that the idea that you can make people agitated, you can make them feel ecstatically wonderful using some fairly simple physiological tricks, like shouting at them, for example. That seems to work quite well. Get up on the pulpit and have a shout at them. There is, you can bludgeon a human being until they're overwhelmed and they have an ecstatic experience. It's euphoria. Very good indicators, called in another area. And that wonderful feeling, that kind of brief infatuation with the world and everything in it, is quite easy to do to people. Get them to stare at something for a while. Get them to walk round and round in circles. Anything repetitive will do it, basically. And you've then got this opening where you can pour a bit of language in. And you can redefine that experience. It's now that they've, felt the experience of the cosmos, the cosmic consciousness, or, they've done this or they've done that. And people will start looking for a state that then has a set of meanings. They will start wanting to repeat that euphoric experience. Like members of Transcendental Meditation, I was asked to write a book about them, and after 6 months research, I said I'm not going to do it. It's bad enough being harassed by one group, without getting, because I found out things that were quite frightening along the way. But that there were people who actually did 12 hours a day of their, staring at, repeating the name of a deity or demon over and over to yourself, not in a religious way, of course, and, trying to break your coccyx by jumping up and down while in a cross-legged position. But they do 12 hours a day of this. They become so involved in this ritual and the meaning of this ritual, and that's an emotional sort of, it's like a drug dependence, trying to get the hit again. The rat pressing the lever to get the high again. The automatic behavior you see in casinos, where people are, pulling the arm of the one-armed bandit and, pouring away their savings at times, because it's a repetitive sort of hypnotic action and an emotional state in which language will intensify and have, much more significance, so that the words can become very loaded. Say, look at Triumph of the Will, the 1934 Nuremberg Rally, where the use of language, the use of words, and the responses, the incredible fervour that you see through the stadium, because Leni Riefenstahl carefully cut out the many hours where nothing at all happened, and Hitler picked his nose, she said, quite a lot, and she foolishly cut that out. I didn't pay to see a movie of just him picking his nose, but this rousing a crowd through the use of shouting and language, and all those lovely gestures that he, of course, published a book of. Me standing in front of the mirror, holding my fists out. For real, he published a book of himself posing.
There are pictures you can get. There is a website, the name of which escapes me, but they actually have some of the photographs, some of these old photographs of him practicing and choreographing his speech.
It sold probably millions of copies.
Yeah,
because of when it was, it was published in the 30s in Germany, in Deutschland, but there you get the non-verbal language that Christian talked about. That Hitler, I've never seen anybody else do the double fists, where he pulls his fists up in front of his nose together and then pulls them down. And I don't remember seeing anybody else do that. Other than a couple of soul singers, as they sink to the ground, But it's an unusual gesture, and you see that he refined and developed gestures, I think, in the belief that they did have some psychological impact on his viewers. I don't think he did it because he thought it would be a laugh. I think he thought he was refining influence there. He was trying to be persuasive and commanding, and he was very successful at it.
Well, and I think those sort of gestures also become so ingrained in the back of our mind, whether we're aware of them or not, that when we see other politicians or leaders, the master, the guru, use those same things, it sparks something. We're not quite sure why, but we're swayed to believe what they're saying, or this sense of dread and fear takes over us. And a lot of time, maybe the non-verbal communication gestures and things like that often have even more powerful meanings. We could look at the Nazi salute, obviously. I mean, it's one of those things, if you kind of do it alone in your room, it feels weird. Even when there's no eyes. No, I'm just saying, I'm saying if you, for the listeners.
What were you wearing when you did this, Chris?
I'm saying for the listeners, you're listening to it right now. Just do it, wherever you are, and you get this weird feeling.
That's not a good suggestion, Pierce.
Well, I'm saying it's wrong. You shouldn't be doing it.
Hang on a minute. If you happen to be in Germany, listeners, don't do it.
Do this.
Yes,
exactly.
What's one
France.
it's
and
maybe
if you're at
a bit
a party
more,
with a certain prince, don't do it.
or a bit more relevant is I'm sure you guys have seen this this thing with the OK sign that
Yes.
it's meant to be a white power salute type thing, and even that is debatable whether that's actually real or not, but it has gone beyond that to the point where everyone assumes now that if you do the OK sign and you're a white person, you are a white nationalist. And
if you're a black person.
Oh yeah, it doesn't even matter, right?
In some cultures, if you do it, it's a very rude sexual symbol.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
and it's something that I don't do it anymore. I'll give a thumbs up because so far that's okay.
That's also rude in some countries.
Yeah, you just can't get away with it.
The thing is, our non-vocal, our unspoken communication is much more limited culturally. It is much more unique to a particular place where we are. Where I grew up in a largely immigrant neighborhood, which incorporated Eastern European people, Italians, Germans, Dutch, Scandinavians, Irish, Scottish.
Back in New Jersey, yep.
In northeast New Jersey, yes. And people who'd come in to Ellis Island, they settled within a stone's throw of Ellis Island on the whole. And so my neighborhood was full of people. And the thing I began to figure out as I got older was even a simple thing like how people gesture with their hands when they speak or don't gesture. It was possible to sit down and say, well, things like, how far did they extend their hand from their body when they do that? Do they do it with the palm facing almost straight up or exactly inwards, or is it kind of facing downwards? How bent is their elbow? Do they move their hand slowly? Do they move it very rapidly? Does it move side to side or up to down? And you could actually see that there were certain people from certain countries whose gestures were more or less similar and were different from people from other countries, just because their particular group of folks had shared these gestures. And so whether they used very expansive gestures or slow gestures or quick chopping gestures, it was partly to do with where they came from and what family they grew up in or what village they grew up in.
And you can also watch somebody who's been through two cultures, somebody who at the age of 12 or 13 moved to another country, and they were able therefore to completely adopt the gestures and language of the place they'd moved to. It's said to be before 14, but whatever, it's going to vary somewhat. I think statistics are not very reliable. I wouldn't have. But
you just made that one up, didn't you?
83% of statistics are made up on the spot, as Vic Reeves, the great Vic Reeves, once said. I think it was 83%. I'd hate to misquote him. Lies, damned lies and statistics. What on earth was I talking about?
You were talking about people moving from one culture to another at a young age.
So they will have both of the cultures. When they're at home, good Ukrainians, they'll speak Russian or whatever we want to call that language. They'll speak the language
Ukrainian.
Yeah, they'll speak Ukrainian. Those things will be happening. But there will be, or Italian or Spanish or what have you. And you will see not only does the person have a different accent when they speak. So it's one of the things that got me that at school I was taught that if I wanted to speak French, I had to speak it like this. Rather than, using my own intonation, which the French don't have too much of a problem understanding, because my father spoke French with an English intonation and he got along fine. He used to work there. But this person will not only have a different language, and they'll have different mannerisms.
Sure.
So when you move them back into their family setting, there'll be that. And I think it's one of the things about identity, and this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I think it's really important that there's this notion out there that it's sometimes, there's a cult identity and there's a pre-cult. And in fact, there are many, many strands of identity. And in somebody who's grown up between two cultures, and let's face it, we all grow up between two cultures, family life and life outside the home are going to be different things. There are going to be different expectations, even in a village, where nobody's moved for 200 years and they're ferociously inbred. Sorry, that's got nothing to do with it. That there'll be these commonalities and differences, and they're automatic. So the one they say about siblings, it's sometimes I've read that in psychology, all sorts of statements are made about sibling relationships. Only one of them is true, and that is that the sibling hierarchy lasts forever. Mm-hmm. So when Napoleon went home for Christmas and his older brother, who was a street sweeper, was there, the older brother was in charge.
Yeah.
But that's one set of identities, the identities, and that identity has with it a language.
Yeah.
Being a member of the family, in my family, when I visited my absolutely wonderful and many, about 7 or 8 of them still left alive, my great aunts and uncles, one of them they'd be very joyful people, lovely people. One of them would say oranges, and the whole room would fall about laughing. You can't beat that. It's like in the Soviet Union where comedy was pretty much forbidden, and you've got this thing about jokes being numbered.
Yes.
So they could sit in the cell and one of them would say 47 and they'd all laugh. And then one of them would go 19 and they go, what are you talking about? No, that's inappropriate. But the languages are created. So with deaf children who are not allowed sign language, they created sign language in one of the Central American countries. They created it, that we are going to communicate, and something is made. But when you get to 2 million words or whatever it is in the English language, you've got to a point where what do we actually mean? That words are changing their meanings all the time. Words are sort of George Orwell uses the word egregious in an essay, and he says, well, here we are, let's look it up. It means surpassing, excellent, or shocking, because it had transformed its meaning in his generation. It had picked up, I don't even remember which is its original meaning. That's egregious of me, really, not remembering its real meaning. So in that complexity, the thought that these words mean, I should be really angry with those people over there, or I should really like these people over here. And the horror that in politics, that the very word conveys the idea of manipulating people to vote for you, to give you authority. And it's so unfair because so many people are involved in politics really do mean it. They really do not have easy lives because they're trying to do something. They're trying to achieve something positive. And we've come to a kind of cynical Hollywood view now. It's all primary colours. It's all, some sort of scam that's going on, which, of course, it kind of is because they've got spin doctors and propagandists and people like Frank Luntz to write their speeches, It shocked me. I was on a train once and I heard 3 members of the Salvation Army talking, and one of them was a young guy and he was a speechwriter to the general, the woman running the Salvation Army. And he said, I insert Monty Python comments, but I have to explain them to her. And the 2 old people that sat with him were going, shut up. In a very nice sort of Salvation Army sort of way, but
I heard similar stories about Margaret Thatcher, where one of her speechwriters tried to write a joke into her speech and had to explain it to her and explain how to deliver it, and it didn't come off anyway.
Well, as John Cleese said, Theresa May is like Margaret Thatcher, but with a sense of humour. I saw a film clip last week of Margaret Thatcher falling asleep at the podium while talking.
Seriously?
For real. Yeah, her head just fell
boring
forward.
even herself.
Well, the thing that not everybody knows about Margaret Thatcher, she had trained herself to only sleep 4 hours a night. So when you look at the symptoms of severe sleep deprivation, she was suffering.
She was doing microsleep.
She would fall asleep, doubtless, at the wheel, as some people would say. So,
Jesus.
Giving her the government of a country was not necessarily the cleverest thing to do. But do politicians sleep at all, or are they transdimensional lizards?
Big question.
That is the big question.
Well, I'm sure that's for a different program, Pierce.
Yes.
What I was talking about,
any of them.
Where I was going with this idea of our idiosyncratic nonverbal communication is that you begin to recognize that there are things that mark out the subculture of a particular sect too, and they aren't simply a way of saying I'm one of you, although they do certainly mean that. They are also ways of enhancing one's commitment and controlling doubts. They become mechanisms for controlling doubts, because one of the things is that if we feel disaffected...
Stop thought-terminating cliches and that kind of thing.
Sure. If we feel disaffected with someone or with a group of people, our body language changes too, so that you get the whole thing of the head is held more still, it maybe is tilted slightly downward, the hands don't move as much, the body's kind of clenched together. You get all these things which say, I'm out of sorts with these people.
The eyes that stare or the eyes that look away.
Sure, yeah. But it affects the entire body too. And you get all these things which say, I'm a part of you, until they start saying, I'm not a part of you. So you get the uniform clothing, whether it's the International Society for Krishna Consciousness dressing in very stereotypical ways, which they're gradually moving away from.
Funny haircuts.
The haircuts, I don't know about funny, but they're haircuts.
Well, the top knot. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
You don't find it.
Come on, look at our football players. Come on, don't some of those people?
Yeah, but
absolutely ridiculous.
We're not. They're wonderful. And in fact, I saw an interview. No. I will be heard. I saw an interview with a stylist who'd actually gone out to the World Cup because 5 members of the England team all had their hair done by him, and they were all. He was going on about how beautiful it was, and he convinced me.
So they all had the same top and kind of.
No. They all got really quite funky differences between their hair. I was quite impressed. So let's be careful what we say here about hairstyling.
Oh yes, This is an example of football as the national religion, but we won't go there just yet, will we?
That's another show too.
That is another show. Yes.
But I'm just saying that the top knot, the brush of hair and everything else shaved, it is funny. It not in the sense of I laugh at them, but it's peculiar. It's unusual, even in our society. It does
stand out, and it's meant to stand out. Of course.
Exactly.
It's meant to say, I'm one of the other people who look like this, and I'm not one of these
crowd.
Yes, yeah. and I'm not a carmy. I don't belong to these awful people. But then you get Scientologists with that. You get Scientologists with that stare, that incessant, unblinking stare, and as part of their tone 4D. It's not
unblinking. It's just less blinking.
It's just less blinking. Yes, of course, but it is.
The blinkless TR0 was a brief period in the early 1970s. I did talk to people who did it. They were told they had to do at least 2 hours. So some hours, in fact, those are the words. So some is a plural, it must be 2. And they put a timer there, and they would try and sit without blinking. And the hallucinations people had, the amount of people who just fell off the chair,
Sure.
And there were people who reckoned they'd done it.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Imagine the damage to your eyes if you did that.
Well,
and then they blamed Otto Roast for doing it after he'd been chucked out, and he carried the blame. It wasn't his idea, of course, but he was a convenient scapegoat. A head on a pike, as
sure.
Mr. Hubbard said.
But all of these things. Now, the thing with them is, and this is only a part of it. The thing with them is that successfully doing them is an emotional bolster to the person. I am doing my TR0, or I am holding my head in this fashion, or I am I am smiling at everybody the way I'm supposed to, or I'm not smiling because the world is in serious condition and we're all going to die at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Whatever it is, whatever the thing is that's you.
I am in present time. I am in present time.
Yes. It is. It is our.
If it's present time.
It is. It's time to give out presents. But it's our way of reaffirming our loyalty, and that's important. You even get it with people who have come out of Hindu and Buddhist backgrounds. Their hands sometimes just slip right into the various mudras that they have learned while they were in the group. You'll see people sitting with their fingers making that nice little loop and the other fingers extended, because that was a way of saying, well, I'm ready to meditate at the drop of a hat as soon as the master says. And I've seen people as ex-members who will gesture in the way that I happen to know their teacher used to gesture. So it's the mannerisms that have been imbibed, and they're carrying the master in them, even though they are trying to be free of the group.
And that cloning process is so invidious. How much even at an ordinary dinner table, if somebody makes a particular gesture, I notice it more with words. Somebody will use an unusual word, and within 5 minutes, somebody else will use it. You know, if you say embattled, or some word that's not every day, or crenellation, that's a good one. Nice. What a lovely word that is. That's twice I've managed to use that in 1 week. Actually, that's pretty good. Though the other time it was talking about castle walls, so it was a bit more relevant. That within a few minutes, this same word will come back because it's primed somebody else. And gestures around a dining table, watching people, psychologists love doing this kind of thing, don't they? You can have your cameras in the room and see how many times people look at each other and for how long. And you can work out who the alpha in the room is in a whole crowded room by how many times everybody in the room looks in their direction. Important things to know. But you can also show the kind of contagious nature of gestures and words. And that's not a bad thing unless you don't realize it's happening.
Unless it's being used for another purpose.
Well, if you realize it's happening, then it won't have that effect on you. Of course, yes, that is the other issue of what is it being used for. But until we have the humility to accept that we are not fully conscious of everything all the time, that there is thousands of times more information than we perceive flowing into us all the time, so that our autonomic nervous system will work properly, and so that we will be able to, the brain as a predictive mechanism will be able to guess what's going to happen next. We're only alert to a fraction of that. I mean, I've said in my book Opening Minds, quick plug there, that consciousness is like a pebble, and the unconscious is like Mount Everest. That's about a comparison.
Are you implying that you are not fully mindful?
Well, I am fully mindful, Christian.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
I am completely full of my mind. Look, your mind troubles you, Christian. Give it to me. It won't trouble me. That was Maharaji.
Yes, it was Maharaji.
That was Maharaji.
Give it to me. It will not trouble me. Yes.
It will not trouble me.
This is one of the pitfalls of the whole mindfulness thing, is that people think that they can just very easily kind of fall into this state where
we must do a show on mindfulness.
Yes.
We really must. And Christian is definitely the man to do it with, because he is so mindful.
Well, I'm mindful of how mindful I'm not, though, you see, so that makes me more mindful.
It is the mindfulness, of not minding how you mind or your mind, that will ultimately lead to success in giving me all your money.
Right. Just give me a moment. I've got to finish writing this check. But one of the things that we are falling victim to is the idea that that it's a good idea to only be in the present moment, and I know that's not always the intention of teachers.
I know that's not the intention. Which gets rid of memory, doesn't it? Whoops.
Yeah, it's not.
I'm so currently in the prison, I can't speak anymore because I can't remember any words.
I'm not implying that all teachers are trying to do this, but nevertheless, people are coming away from it with this idea that somehow living in the moment, that totally is the ideal state of mind all the time. And I'm sorry, but that's just non-functional in the real world.
Well, I've seen somebody who did it, and he got bandages all over him.
Yeah, well, there is that.
He was living totally in the present, and he hadn't remembered that if you try to walk through a plate glass window, it will cut you.
Well, yes.
Memory can be very useful,
Yes.
Oh, I wonder. It's like the whale in Douglas Adams that saw the ground coming up beneath it and said, "I'll call it ground. I wonder if it will be friendly to me."
I wonder if it'll be friendly. Yes.
Sorry about that.
No, that leads all nice and neatly into the last idea that interests me about communication corruption, and that is the value of how we communicate as a means of transinduction, both hypnotically, which is what people tend to like to talk about, but also simply to create altered states of consciousness.
I don't like the word hypnotic anymore. I just say guided imagination and get on with it.
Yeah, and by talking about guided visualization and guided imagination, it makes it much easier to see the connection between communication and the altered state of consciousness that can result from it. Whether you're just talking straight Ericksonian hypnosis, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, or the more elaborate NLP type things, or we will all sit down and imagine we're in our happy place with eagles flying overhead, and
we will visualize the ball going through the basket.
Yeah, all that kind of thing. But by creating internal experiences like that, you are able to create peak experiences. And we've talked about, John and I have talked about this before, in the context of an extremist group, creating an internal experience like that through guided visualization is going to connect to everything else that's going on around you. So it connects to the teaching, it connects to the claims the group's making for itself, it connects to the leader's claims about himself or herself, and you have mystical confirmation, the confirmation that this unspeakable,
it's working,
undefinable something or other in the great there and then is somehow so real that it's happening to you now.
The spirit of Thog is working through me.
Whatever you call it, and you can create the states of mind by just manipulating the words you use, by manipulating the ideas that you train through someone's mind. Because as I said at the beginning, what you're doing by manipulating your communication is you're causing the person's own inner thought train to stop and wait and become uncertain of where it's going next. And then you give it the release of an answer.
Yeah, and so you take authority, and away you go. Yeah.
Yes, and that kind of corruption of communication means that that a manipulative person, a destructive person, is able to perhaps even create peak experiences simply by the speech and the guiding of visualization and the guiding of ideas. And it's a lot easier when that happens to you to go along with it than it is to start challenging it, because it's a thread that doesn't quite unravel when you pull on it. And you have to resolve the conflict, the inner conflict you have. And the only way to do that really is to see through what's been done to you, or what many people do, which is why they join a group like this. You surrender to it. You simply say, yeah, that's what it is. And the leader's right.
There's the principle of consistency or commitment, as Cialdini has it, that once I think about it as inertia. Once you're moving in a certain direction, you'll keep moving in that direction, and you'll seek confirmation. I've had a few conversations in my life with quite long-term evangelical Christians who had passed through the flush of infatuation, and they were desperately trying to get back to it by convincing me. And I think it exemplifies a state that you see, and you'll see it with a battered spouse partner. The way that reality has to be reconstructed to make sense.
Yeah.
To say I'm not worthy. I am not worthy. Which I think is a quote from both T.S. Eliot and Monty Python. So you can take that either way. But that sense of esteem is gone, and you become dependent. And again, you see, this wasn't my experience. I was just so crazily lucky that I didn't wind up in one of the dreadful gulags, serving the master, as he was called in a certain film. That I escaped from that experience by sheer chance, being put in a terrifying situation where you no longer trust yourself. You cannot be trusted, and that is going to be eroded and eroded and eroded, so that all that is to be believed in, you get ideology over experience, doctrine over person, as Robert J. Lifton so sagely put it, where you've had the life experience of something, and the leader or your abusive partner or whoever says, no, this is the reality. This is what, gaslighting to the extreme, I suppose.
Yeah.
This is what really happened, and you begin to say that. I was told in Scientology that psychiatrists are in a conspiracy. I think it's throughout the whole universe. He usually only talks about this galaxy, but I think this is the whole universe. Psychiatrists, psychotherapists, the rapists, as they'll tell you, psychologists, anybody basically who uses the Greek word for butterfly at the beginning of their name, it is not to be trusted, because they're all working together. Now, if you've ever seen two members of any of those professions actually agreeing on anything, let alone having a conspiracy throughout the universe, then write to me. I'd met some psychiatrists before I was in Scientology, and I'd come to know one of them quite well. And not because I was a mental patient, I hasten to add, not that I should have to add that, but she was a good woman. She was against the use of electroconvulsive therapy. She was against the use of drugs unless she considered it an absolute necessity. I met other people who were psychiatrists who I thought were really among the most dreadful human beings I've ever met. They were kind of one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Though, curiously, that film, the guy who plays the head of the institution was the head of the institution, Pierce?
Is that
One
true?
Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
And that undoes the whole message, doesn't it? He must have been a really nice guy.
Yeah, that's right.
To be willing to do that. But I met people that, should have been there with Nurse Ratched, basically, as well. But when I was told they're all in this conspiracy, the normal thing to do with ideology over experience, social conformity, doctrine over person, would be say, oh, yes, she fooled me. This woman I'd had these many conversations with about poetry and art and all sorts of things, and how difficult it was for her dealing with 14-year-olds who'd fallen pregnant and things like that. That, it didn't dissuade me. And it's only looking back that I go, but it could have done. I could eventually, if I had been humiliated, abused and traumatized, as nearly everybody is, if only by borrowing so much money. I know a guy he left 5 years ago and he still works 2 jobs to pay off the money he borrowed. £35,000 of which was for a parking space at a building they were yet to build. But, that's religion for you, isn't it? I guess some people say that's what it does, but I didn't have, I was lucky, my shell was not broken in that way because nobody tried. I didn't get put into a labour camp or, have all these things done. I did borrow money, but only a couple of £1,000, thankfully. That you lose self. You're Eric Fromm in Escape from Freedom, which is, I think, a phenomenal book. It was recommended by Alan Schefflin. Written in 1941, Fromm's left Germany, gone to America, and he is talking about what Nazism is from the perspective of a non-Freudian psychologist and psychotherapist. And he comes up with this notion of the pseudo-self, that the people just want to do what fits them in with the world around, and they look for pretty much like the narcissistic personality, they look for signs from the outside that they've done the right thing. Yeah. And there's nothing left of them, and he felt that had accelerated in Germany with the industrial age. I've no idea what percentage of people, because Schopenhauer in the 19th century was saying 60% of people are rubbish, Milgram's about 62.5%, isn't it, in the first, that were willing to kill somebody. Oh, it's still good fun. All made up numbers, though. They're all statistics, aren't they? Can't believe it.
Statistics, yes.
We're back to statistics.
And what percentage of this program do you think has been devoted to statistics? I think it's probably about 17%.
I'll make up a number.
Yeah.
Well, please write in. And whoever comes closest will get a free signed conch. I think we've agreed on that.
Yeah, so free signed conch.
That is the standing prize. That is the standing prize. You're right.
Yep.
Well, maybe on that note, because I'm just looking and statistically, we have been here for about 2 hours. So maybe we'll
yes, we have.
We'll leave it there. But I think there's a lot more to explore with so many of the topics that we've just brought up today. But again, I hope this illustrates to the listeners the complexity of communication, and that the listeners out there are a little bit more aware, perhaps, of the power that communication can have. And this is a topic we you emailed me, I don't know, maybe a couple hours ago, Christian, saying you wanted to talk about this, and now we've gone on and on for easily 2 hours. And we could go for another 2.
Well, actually, I would just like to slip in the point of it all.
Yes.
Before we start.
No.
Because there was a reason why.
No, Christian. Next week, tune in and find the point of it all. Sorry.
No. What is the point of it all?
Oh, no.
And that is that these are things which contribute to the difficulties that many members have when they decide to leave the group, because these things become so ingrained that although they consciously are trying to leave the group, they may not necessarily realize that they're carrying inside their heads the echo of the group, which is constantly working against them. So they might have this set of words, whatever their group's key set of words, of slogans, of inwords, of neologisms, whatever they're using, they'll have these still in their minds because they haven't addressed them and said, do I like this? Is it useful to me? Do I want to use it? Or is it time for me to rethink this word and maybe drop it for a while? And I found over and over again that it's possible to be having a conversation with someone who says, calls up and says, well, I've been out of my group for X number of years, but then the conversation very soon lapses into the same kind of conversation I might have with a present member, where the jargon, the in-group language is so rife in everything they're saying that I have to kind of step back and work out a way of getting them to look at these words and ask themselves, does that really mean anything to me anymore? Pierce, you will remember that back a long time ago, there was a slogan for a certain cigarette in America. You can take company name out of the country, but you can't take the country out of company name.
I remember company name cigarettes. I used to smoke them.
Yes, well, I'm trying very hard not to advertise because we are a charity after all. We don't advertise, especially we don't advertise cancer sticks.
Yes.
But
though we will advertise your name if you make a large donation, obviously.
We will say that you are not only selling cancer sticks, but
you'll get a parking
but
space.
You're very manipulative about it because you think you can buy us off. Yeah. Yes. But there is that element which says that emerging from the group isn't simply saying, I want to break my allegiance to the group. It's also recognizing that there are these little triggers, what you could almost call thought time bombs in the person's mind. Sometimes, very often, they will eventually come to the place where they say, oh, that's from so-and-so group. I don't think that anymore. And they'll drop it. But sometimes they'll struggle with it. Sometimes the concept is so deeply embedded that they can't shake it easily. And where that becomes a problem is where it incorporates things like shame and guilt and fear and phobic response.
And disgust.
And disgust. Especially when those things are, I mean, as bad as it is when they feel those things to the outside world, when they direct those emotions inward, they become destructive. So you get people who feel that, I had an ex-member of ISKCON tell me one time that,
which is the Krishna Consciousness Society.
Tell me how they couldn't forget the fact that their leader had said to them that their questions and their doubts meant that they were no better than dog feces on the sandal of Krishna's feet, and they would actually be better off being dead and coming back and trying again. Now,
well, I don't know. I mean, being dog feces on that close to the god Krishna would probably be quite a good thing, wouldn't it? It'd be a lot better than not being near to the godhead.
He didn't mean it as a good thing.
Well, wouldn't it be like, on Stalin's boots or something? I mean, come on, let's get this metaphor really rocking here.
Well, I can only tell you what was actually said to this person and how they responded emotionally.
Yeah.
And it was important for them. It was important for them to begin to look at the string of concepts and words and ideas that made that statement of their leader make sense to them.
Or the young man who was told by Sun Myung Moon that he had the spirit of a wolf, and shortly thereafter he cut his landlady into tiny fragments and splintered all the furniture in the house and put the little bits of her on the fragments.
Yeah, I hadn't heard.
Yeah, it didn't really make the news.
Well, I can see why.
I researched the story with a journalist in about 1993 and talked to the police inspector who'd gone there, and he was a homicide guy who had retired from the force, I think, by then. And he said in his whole career he had never seen anything like what this man did. Now, whether Sun Myung Moon, how much of a push this guy needed to do what he did, I cannot say. I didn't know him. But saying he was a wolf, and them, falling down into that behavior, if he was somebody who was, with no prior record of having harmed anybody, who suddenly was triggered into this incident, even if it was innocuous on Sun Myung Moon's part, you can see that somebody who says, I am the true father. I am the true father of all on the earth. I am the one who has come because Jesus failed. This is the unification church. You can see that person could have a certain authority over a follower who would then interpret very literally what had been said to him. I have the spirit of a wild, ravening beast inside me.
Mm-hmm. I likewise, it must be a good 15 years ago now, but I spoke with a woman who, to make a very long story short, she disagreed with her pastor. Her church was one of these kind of weird offshoot extremist groups in another part of England here. I'll leave it at that for now. But she felt that God wanted her life to go in one direction, and her pastor disagreed with her. And they had a bit of an argument about it, which ended in him telling her that she was so evil that even Jesus couldn't save her. Now, I wish I could laugh at that, but
that's so horrible. That is just an awful thing.
The fact is that you
are the one unforgivable soul in the universe.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there is a huge number of Christians, not only alive now, but down the centuries, who would say that you couldn't be a Christian and simultaneously say that to another human being. You've got to choose, am I a Christian or do I say a thing like that to another human being? But this pastor had no trouble telling her this. Now, the reason that's important is because he said it on the basis of the teaching that he had given his church over the years, to the effect that grace is no longer a gift of God, that God is not a God of love, and that therefore you have to earn every merit you get from God. And obviously, by disobeying your pastor, she was not earning anything except the destruction by God. And that took a couple of years to enable her to realize that whatever this man was teaching, I mean, you can teach anything you like, that we live in a world where, ideally at least, you're allowed to hang an egg off your ear and believe that it makes you invisible if you want. That's, the trouble comes when you oppress other people with your sole belief.
Does that work?
I don't know. I've never actually tried it.
So you won't know until you've tried it, will you?
I just flap my elbows 3 times and close my eyes twice and then spin around once, and it makes me invisible. It works for me. So I've never tried the ear, the egg on the ear. I've never.
Got something that works for you.
I can do it without an egg, But I'm not going to say, well, he had no right to say this or he's not allowed to say that. He's stupid to say it, perhaps. He certainly is cruel, without a doubt. But that's not Christian teaching.
No.
If you don't do what your pastor tells you, God will hate you forever. No, I'm sorry, that's just not there. But it took a couple of years before this young woman could work through and realize that she could freely jettison that kind of teaching and that kind of an attitude and rebuild her understanding of herself and God and make a new beginning for herself. It took a couple of years because that was so deeply entrenched with all the other crazy ideas that supported it, that it undermined her sense of confidence.
And to be sensible, we have to be willing to listen to others. We have to accept that we have blind spots, even me, lacunae, as the psychologists call them, things that we just do not see. In the same way that in front of each of our eyes, there is a blind spot. There's a point that we cannot see, because otherwise our eyes wouldn't be connected to our brains. And that in some cases, that might be a good thing.
Yeah, but they still would be pretty, wouldn't they?
We have lacunae, so we have to be not too touchy and difficult with the people around us. We have to find a situation in which those we trust can tell us what they really think about us, and and then throw them out and never talk to them again.
Disfellowship.
Yeah, but
yes.
as we said much earlier on, with Christian and I, we've known each other for 30 years. We've never had an upset or anything really distressing happen between us. We're good friends. There
was that time when you put the X-Lax in my cereal, and I retaliated.
It was your own good, mate.
And I retaliated by poisoning your coffee. But other than that,
the strychnine was just a joke, mate.
I did accept that in the end when you told me that after I got out of hospital.
Got to have a sense of humour, ain't you? But it is all bound up in communication and absolutely, finally, Pierce, from my point of view, this notion of authority, that you can have expert authority, where somebody knows what they're doing and they can help you. They can fix your computer, your car, what have you, give you surgery and have you get better. And that's good. But on the other hand, most authority is rank authority. It's now, as Danny DeVito says in that wonderful film Matilda, to what's her name, Mara Wilson. It's easy. I'm big and you're little. I'm right and you're wrong. And there's still, our whole society is riddled with this attitude. And people, with good authority, you can say, sorry, I don't understand that. What do you mean? And they can explain what they mean. When I say that the universe is bound together with strings and superstrings, I actually mean there's a load of dark energy and dark matter all around the 11-dimensional P membrane, out of which well, that's fine then. No, they really can. They can piece together those things if they're an expert, and they don't get upset about being asked. But on the other hand, and I'm afraid it's gone through all the professions, education, the law, certainly the clergy, wherever you go, these people they're basically in-pot dictators. They're people who want you to, another Scientology thing. I was at a talk. It's a guy called Peter Clark, who's a professor at King's College in London. Is that right, Christian?
And I knew him from there. I think he also had a connection to Oxford, but I'm not sure. Well, he might have been an emeritus there or something.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. He's on the stage, right, and he says, Scientology no longer harasses people. So I stood up and I said, hang on a minute. They were harassing me yesterday. And he said, I've got a plane to catch. Sit down. So the next guy who came on, which was Brian Tully, said, I'm the authority because I'm up here on the stage. If you have any questions, please stop me and ask them. But Peter Clark had gone and caught his plane by then, so didn't teach him anything. But that it's very important in communication to say, where does the authority lie? And for autonomy, the authority of what I do must lie with me. What treatment I have, what therapy I do, what foods I eat that are to my taste, how much I exercise, all of these things belong to me. And I am smart enough to work out how much of them to do, or how little, in the case of alcohol, for example, of them to do. And we have, you said nanny state, again, long ago in another galaxy. And it's true, the whole society, if open minds is about one thing, it's about this sense of authority and saying, no, we're all participants, we all have rights. And democracy is not a perfect system, as Winston Churchill said, but it's the best we've found yet. But consensus, the idea of allowing people a voice, allowing people to express themselves and calming down and not just blindly following orders, and which in our schools, again, plug for Ken Robinson and his excellent books, and very learned books, but very readable books about education and what's going wrong. This where authority takes over. And my son has recently passed a biology exam, and he actually, I shouldn't say this on air, but I'm going to, he actually stopped going to school 6 months before he took the exam because he figured he didn't understand the subject. He'd actually failed biology in the mock exam, and he passed 9 exams. He's a clever lad. And he watched the Khan Academy on biology, and he said, at school, they say, right, just memorize this bit, we'll explain it later. And it's like, oh, you missed a lesson last week. Well, we're tough, here we go. And he got a pretty good grade in his biology it's meant to be an 8-term course, and he'd done half a term or something. But by doing it, Khan does the biology himself, so he explains everything, point by point, and you get an understanding. And that, too, is an aspect of cultic communication in cults and out, that you're told gobbledygook, you're told that you've got to memorize this. Einstein, it is said, could not remember the speed of light. And he said when challenged, he failed the Edison test. So he couldn't have been employed by Edison. He wasn't clever enough, right? He said, if I need to know the speed of light, I can look it up in a book. I don't remember any other formula. I use them when I need them. Whereas we're still now, we have examinations where people are asked the date when a particular, legal exams, they'll want to know the date when a particular statute was passed. The 1879 poor law, what have you, that about whether your memory is great, not about the subject you're meant to be becoming excellent in. And I really think the world of education has lost its way. But we've got another show on mindfulness. We've got one on education. Spike wants to do something on Star Trek, which I think is a very good idea. So we have plenty of territory to cover.
Absolutely. And I want to thank both my guests, John Atack and Christian Szurko, for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear some more from the Open Minds Foundation and maybe get enter the contest to win a signed conch shell, then you can go to openmindsfoundation.org, where you can find lots of articles. You can find all of the previous episodes as well. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Christian Szurko's work, then you can go to dialogcentre.org.uk, and we will link up to that in the show notes as well, so please do check that out. And once again, if you want to support the work that we do here, if you enjoy the podcast that we produce and the types of conversations that we have, then please do spread the word, share this podcast around, tell a friend, post it on your social media. All of that really does help quite a bit in getting the podcast out there so that more and more people can listen. And you can find us, of course, on all of the major social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you're interested in some of the work that I do, you can also find my own radio show at PorkinsPolicyReview.com. But I want to thank all of you so much for listening. Thank you to Christian and John, and we'll all be talking to you very soon.